This program is about spies, the tools of their trade, and the innocent people they've spied on. Tonight we name the European state which has spied on this retired RAF wing commander, which has spied on Scotland's leading trade union official, which has spied on this 93-year-old widow, which has spied on the Pope, and which has used futuristic technology to snoop on its closest allies and on its own businessmen. All this is the work of British intelligence. Tonight on World in Action, a glimpse of the secret state. We show how Britain's secret servants are beyond control, sidestepping the law and invading our privacy.
Everybody, or everything rather, is a target. It has to be, actually, because it's simply sucked into this machine.
More than 30 former officers, many of senior rank and long experience, have told us of their concerns. And so has this man. Until last year, Robin Robison worked in the nerve centre of British intelligence. He was so shocked by the abuse of power which he witnessed there that he has decided to speak out publicly.
I felt that I was sitting in the middle of something that really smelt quite immoral. I felt that quite a lot of it was to do with the way in which government, once it has the access to the means of obtaining information, became information hungry and obtained information about a great deal of British life and indeed broader than that, that really was not strictly necessary and not really to do with defending the realm.
More than any other Western nation, Britain allows its spies to work behind closed doors. Their power to intrude is sweeping, but not supervised by Parliament. Their budgets are huge, but undisclosed. They watch, but are not seen. Britain is watched by MI5, the world by MI6. Most pervasive is the eavesdropping agency GCHQ, with listening stations around the globe. These secret agencies feed their intelligence up to the second floor of the Cabinet Office at number 70 Whitehall. That's the headquarters of the Joint Intelligence Committee, the brain of British intelligence, and the central command in the defence of the British realm. The Joint Intelligence Committee decides who should be spied on and how. It's where Robin Robison worked until last year as an administrative officer. Every day he sifted top-secret intelligence. He sat in on the weekly meetings of Britain's security chiefs. But for Robison, its work often seemed to have very little to do with defending democracy.
In practice, the security and intelligence services were operating in a way which was deceitful at times and at best creating a fog around the whole situation so that ministers knew as little as possible and the public knows next to nothing, and MPs really know more than the average person in the street.
Robison and others like him have told us that they're worried by the sheer scale of Britain's spying, and they've alerted us to sophisticated new technology which has effectively made privacy a thing of the past. Even a business letter written in the privacy of an office is no longer safe.
I can begin to see a signal now which is jumping around quite a fair bit.
With the aid of a receiver and a TV monitor, an engineer whose normal job is to protect computers demonstrates the ease with which confidential information can be grabbed from a distant screen.
I can certainly see somebody now. It's confidential written up there. It's a London address. I'm sending this letter by hand, as it is essential to discover our plans.
And if someone comes along and grabs the image off your computer screen, does that leave any footprints, any sign that it's happened?
You would have no idea whatsoever. None at all.
This technology was devised at GCHQ, the Government Communications Headquarters in Cheltenham. Its job is not to carry communications, but to listen to other people's. It can hear the Russian tank driver on his radio or the diplomat on his telex, anyone anywhere who uses the airwaves. GCHQ was developed to listen to the Soviet bloc, but its reach has been growing wider and wider. The material it gathers is known as signals intelligence, or SIGINT for short.
I mean, every day we had sackloads of stuff coming from GCHQ. the SIGINT would land on our desks, and our job there was to sort through the stuff. This SIGINT would comprise telephone conversations that had been picked up, it would comprise telexes, or any kind of electronic surveillance techniques, and it would be from all over the world.
GCHQ's listening stations are locked on to civilian satellites and telephone cables around the planet. At any one time, these dishes near Bude in Cornwall can tap 4,000 phone calls or 96,000 telex lines as they leave Britain. Right under the nose of Scotland Yard, one of GCHQ's most important stations is running an operation which, like much of GCHQ's work, bends the law to breaking point. This anonymous red brick building at number 8 Palmer Street secretly intercepts every single telex that passes into, out of or through London. Thousands of diplomatic, business and personal messages every day. In some of Britain's most powerful computers, telexes from Palmer Street and other GCHQ stations are fed into a program known as the Dictionary. It picks out key words from this mass of SIGINT and hunts out hundreds of individuals, corporations and political groups. According to the law, GCHQ can intercept a telex only with a specific warrant. It has no right at all to take every international telex in London. But it has constructed a loophole in the law, literally, up on the 4th floor. There it has hired a small group of carefully vetted British Telecom employees to monitor the dictionary. The sole purpose is to pretend that GCHQ has never really intercepted this material at all.
British Telecom people up there are a very big secret. I mean, it's nothing to do with national security. It's because it's not legal to take every single telex. Well, they take everything. All the embassies, all the business deals, even the birthday greetings. They feed it into the dictionary. They reckon that by putting the BT people up there, they could make out that they haven't got their hands in it.
This legally dubious new technology has powerful uses. GCHQ can track terrorists, drug dealers and serious criminals across the planet. But the Joint Intelligence Committee has also turned it on a range of targets who represent no threat. Their privacy is being invaded without any apparent legal or moral justification. Behind the rituals of diplomacy, the British government has turned the weapons of espionage on some of its closest friends. We've been told that GCHQ's dictionary is routinely programmed to report the communications of King Fahd and the Saudi royal family, and of the Sultan of Brunei, one of Britain's wealthiest allies, and of the Pope. British intelligence has mounted a long-term secret operation to tap the links between the Pope and his archbishops and ambassadors around the world. GCHQ has even cracked the Vatican codes in search of useful tidbits. Even within the special bond of the common market, Britain has chosen to steal secrets from its partners.
I used to see red boxes which contained CX reports. And CX reports were the written reports of agents working for MI6 abroad. And these used to come in from European countries as well as further afield. And some of these European countries, thinking of France or Germany or Italy or Spain, and in particular Brussels, where of course you've got the EC.
When an intercept arrives at GCHQ, it's given a trigraph, 3 letters, to denote the type of intercept. FRD, French diplomatic. ITD, Italian diplomatic. SPD, Spanish diplomatic.
Did you ever see any evidence that MI6 had actually procured informants and agents in, say, the French or German government?
The evidence I saw was the fact that they were MI6 reports labelled delicate source.
What does delicate source mean?
Delicate source was a classification which meant that we had obtained that information from somebody who was, as it says, in a delicate position should it be known.
You're talking about a secret agent?
Yes.
In the French government or in the German government?
Somebody who was acting as a spy.
The idea that GCHQ doesn't listen to its friends is crap, as is the idea that it doesn't listen to its SIGINT allies. We do it, they do it.
What about a close ally like Ireland?
We had reports in Ireland. We certainly heard a lot through MI5 and MI6, but then you might expect that with terrorism. But I mean, for example, the CIA hit somebody in Dublin, and we heard a bit from them.
Do you mean they had an agent, a secret?
Yeah, that's right.
Somewhere in the Dublin government you're talking about?
That's right.
Our industrial strategy is a strategy for an enterprise economy, for setting industry free to prosper, with laws to guarantee fair competition here and in Europe.
But Britain has routinely tried to steal an unfair advantage through commercial espionage. Robin Robison saw secrets from foreign car makers, electronics companies and steel producers. Europe, America and Japan were all targets in a new war of commerce.
The Cold War was, in a sense, a purely military competition. But now several targets have been arranged and aligned, actually. You're now talking about national survival in rather different terms. You're talking about national survival vis-à-vis the Japanese, vis-à-vis the common market, vis-à-vis the Russians, and so on.
This new war also has a home front. The Joint Intelligence Committee is as interested in British businesses as in their foreign competitors.
Marconi, GEC, Rolls-Royce, those kind of companies were mentioned in the context of deals, large amounts of money transferring hands.
But maybe you're being a bit discreet here. When you say these British companies were mentioned, you mean that their communications were being intercepted?
Yes. I mean, there's no doubt about it. If they were mentioned, then they must have been being intercepted.
Inside the JIC, Robison handled intercepted communications from British companies in engineering, finance, oil, mining and chemicals. Could it be that these British company communications that were intercepted that you saw, that these were accidental?
I saw much, much more than could be seen as accidental. I mean, I used to sort it into piles, so it was a lot.
Commercial traffic is now in the intelligence domain, and that can be dispersed and be used, interpreted for a number of ways. A, obviously for just plain information, but B, it can be used for a great deal of political manipulation.
In a secure loading bay at MI5 headquarters, one of Whitehall's fleet of unmarked vans delivers high-grade intelligence. These vans feed a secret network of contacts which British intelligence has established in almost every department of government.
They go around the obvious places like MI5, MI6, GCHQ, Parliament Street, and also the Ministry of Defence, Foreign and Commonwealth Office, the Palace, the Houses of Parliament, but less obvious places too, like the Department of Trade and Industry, Transport, the Bank of England, and the Export Credit Guarantee Department.
This mixing of intelligence and commerce has vast potential. Governments could try to undermine the economies of vulnerable nations or tip off favoured companies at home. The British government has started to use it. The JIC leaks it out under its cover name, Secretariat F, or by laundering it through the Department of Trade. This businessman has travelled the world trading in foodstuffs. Secretly, he was also an agent for MI5, who rewarded him with commercial secrets.
Over Russian intentions on international trading, what prices could be acceptable, certain people to contact within the Russian foreign trade ministries who would help.
At first, he earned his secrets by giving MI5 gossip about Russians he met. Then he was asked for a different kind of help.
It became apparent that they would like me to arrange for certain individuals to be in certain places at certain times, wining and dining them, to allow hostesses to join us at the table. And with the basic idea of a couple of them ending up back at the girls' flats, and the fun and games being filmed, which would be used for either turning somebody round, becoming a British operative, or to shut somebody up.
His reward for these nights on the town? Further leaks of sensitive business information.
It meant that whilst one could not guarantee every single trip one made that one would do business, it certainly put the success rate up considerably.
But what was the greatest sign of your success?
One was the profitability of the company, and secondly, we did win an award for exports.
One particularly controversial use of commercial intelligence involves the arms trade. Inside the JIC, Robin Robison found that they were listening intently to the world's arms dealers. He assumed that they wanted to block dangerous or illegal deals. Then he realized that they were doing something quite different.
And we saw the details of, say, for example, a deal between Hungary and Yugoslavia, or Czechoslovakia selling explosives abroad, all these kind of things. And this would then be passed to DESO, the Ministry of Defence, or to the Export Credit Guarantee Department in the city, who would then help finance deals, arms deals between...
This is the complete reverse of arms control. This is promoting arms sales.
It is. I mean, it's helping our companies get in there, knowing the price, knowing who to go to, knowing what the other people are wanting, and to me it is an improper use of the intelligence and security network.
Britain's defenders are now spying not only on their friends and their salesmen, but also, we have found, on their own countrymen.
We produce regular weekly lists. There's a traveller's list for people who go abroad. So businessmen, peace activists, NCCL once or twice. That's compiled partly from visa applications which were all picked up at Palmer Street. There's a contacts list for people who are in touch with various foreign countries, like the Soviet Union. Now, it's got subsections on trade unions and peace groups, sometimes MPs. Now, that tells you the caller, the person that they've called, and what they've said.
Sources from GCHQ told us of some of their unlikely targets, including a 93-year-old woman who's run a lifelong campaign for world peace, Mrs. Taki Morris.
I think the main thing to do is to get everybody you could speak to and try and understand each other, because there's so much understanding that is necessary so badly.
Her work won her honours from the United Nations. Here, it earned her the tag security risk. For years, GCHQ listened to her international phone calls. Are you a threat to national security?
No, I don't think so. I think I'm perfectly all right.
One British target provoked a notorious row inside GCHQ. An official refused on principle to handle telexes from East European trades unions to the head of the Scottish TUC, Campbell Christie. Mr. Christie is a former Admiralty civil servant.
The STUC has had contacts with trade union centres in both Eastern Europe and Western Europe and elsewhere for very many years, and I would have thought it was quite well known that we had these contacts. It doesn't imply support for particular regimes or economic structures. And if we're talking about democracy and pluralism, it just seems to me, and we talk about that, and we talk about the importance of that in Eastern Europe, it just seemed to me hypocritical of the state to carry out that sort of surveillance.
GCHQ has been listening to British targets only when they talk to the rest of the world. If MI5 or MI6 want to listen to Britons talking to each other, they have to turn to the relatively limited technology of British Telecom. It has a specialist team of tappers. In the last 2 years alone, this team has grown by 50%.
Number of staff have increased from 50 to 75. 75 can do about 35,000 intercepts a year if they keep busy at it. Since the number of warrants issued is only 500, and although some of those warrants will cover a number of lines, it still does not explain why that number of staff is needed. It's clear that a lot of unwanted intercepts are going on.
But who would be the target of those unwarranted intercepts?
Trades unionists going about their lawful business and representing their members, people who are involved in political activities that the government doesn't like.
Lieutenant Robert Lawrence was one of these. He was a hero and a casualty of the Falklands War. His story was told in the TV film Tumbledown. Incredibly, he and his father, a retired RAF officer, were deemed worthy of tapping by British Telecom.
He always said that wounded heroes were a great embarrassment. Dead ones were fine, absolutely fine, and you could sort of glorify them. But one who was wounded but still sufficiently articulate to shout about things that went wrong or about his own feelings was an embarrassment, I think.
Both father and son had been security vetted, but they angered Whitehall by publicly complaining over Robert's treatment. Security sources told us that Wing Commander Lawrence, his son, and the rest of the family all had their phones tapped.
10 years ago, I would have just said absolute nonsense. Now, I feel very differently about that, and certainly I would not be surprised if what you suggested did happen. Certainly there was a feeling, whenever you picked up the phone, that someone was listening, the little clicks and unnatural pauses. Robert was totally convinced that he was tapped, but of course no evidence.
They can tap a phone only if a person is a threat to national security, engaged in serious crime, or undermining the economy of the country. Are you any of those three things?
Well, I would think that's probably all right, but I would just about burst if anyone thought that of me, any of those of me.
So who controls the intelligence services, and how do these things happen? Officially, cabinet ministers are supposed to keep an eye on the intelligence services, but Robin Robison found that the reality was very different.
In my experience, ministers would never ever set foot in the Joint Intelligence Committee, and we never ever received requests from ministers for information.
Well, supposing hypothetically a minister got himself busy and came to the JIC and said, I want to see the following files to make sure that things are being run properly.
It wouldn't happen.
But how do you know that it wouldn't happen?
Well, because we had files which were specifically not for ministerial eyes.
You're saying they were marked, not for ministers' eyes?
Yes.
But how did that strike you at the time?
As cut across any pretense of democratic accountability.
The final framework of supervision is the law. The intelligence services, like all government servants, are supposed to obey it.
The only law at GCHQ is to do what you're told. If MI5 or MI6 wants something, GCHQ provides it. The law just isn't discussed. The only time the law is mentioned is the Official Secrets Act. What you can't say, not what you can't do.
Officially, the first commandment of GCHQ is that even though it may pick up information on British citizens talking to the rest of the world, it must never turn its extraordinary power on Britons speaking to each other.
But Robison came across evidence that they were willing to abandon even this most basic rule.
I did once see a memo from Peter Merrichurch, who was the then head of GCHQ, which was suggesting that GCHQ should take over some of the interception of communications which had been the province of MI5 and the Special Branch.
You're talking about phone tapping here?
Phone tapping and listening into other forms of communication.
Who did he want to phone
Well,
tap?
he was wanting in particular to hone in on and tighten their grip on the domestic world, and in thinking in particular of how they defined subversives. In other words, people who were concerned about nuclear power and nuclear energy, and also the commercial and economic world.
There's an elaborate system for ensuring that phone taps are carried out only with a properly approved warrant. If GCHQ moved in and started tapping British telephones, what effect would that have on the warrant system?
The warrant system was worth nothing, because if GCHQ just needed to press a few buttons, nobody's going to be any the wiser.
So, how did you feel when you read this proposal?
Well, I was concerned.
Do you know how the other intelligence chiefs reacted to that idea? Did they stand up and say, well, this is appalling, we can't bypass the warrant system?
Well, the impression I had was that the intelligence community wanted to use GCHQ to its full potential.
So this was not a rogue, a renegade idea?
No,
that
that wasn't my impression.
What became of the Merrichurch memo is not clear. If GCHQ did turn on the British, it could, technically, tap so many calls that its staff would be overwhelmed. But its scientists are working on a new computer system to pick out keywords from phone calls, just as the dictionary already does with telexes. Then, there would be no limit to its intrusion.
The heart of the problem is this. The effective end of the Soviet threat has left the bristling weaponry of Western intelligence with a shortage of real enemies. Yet new technology continues to provide them with still more weapons to turn on those who are not really their enemies at all.
They are benevolent in many respects, but they have a great potentiality for malevolence and for mischief and for a kind of, ultimately, electronic big brother. I mean, not a big brother, a very big brother indeed, if I may say so. Big and getting bigger.
What are you hoping to achieve by speaking out like this?
Well, I feel and hope that speaking out is what is needed, because were everybody to remain silent, we would have no impetus for change. And I feel that it is not wrong to speak out about structures and systems which are not damaging to national security, but purely pointing out to the British public the way in which our governmental system is operating in quiet and secretive ways, unbeknown to them.
Good morning, thank you for calling the SDR Hotel. Jane speaking, how may I help you? Good morning, thank you for calling the SDR Hotel. Good morning, thank you for calling the SDR Hotel.